Hello and welcome to 42 Years and Counting, the Beverly Hills Supper Club Memorial Podcast. My name is Brad David Berman. Thank you all for attending. My mother, Eileen Druckman, worked as a reservationist at the Beverly Hills Supper Club and was there the night of the tragic fire in Memorial Day weekend, 1977, and she was the first person to call and notify the fire department. My mother survived, but suffered quite a bit from the smoke and chemical inhalation and was never the same since the fire. Her suffrage impacted me much more than I had recognized. Before proceeding any further, I'd like to ask us to take a few moments for a silent prayer for the 165 people who perished and 200 injured and 2,000 plus guests who were there on that night of May 28, 1977. And for those from both sides of the Ohio River who responded, rescued, and took action, and the press and the volunteers and the performers. So if we could just take a few seconds and my mother referenced the fire to me through the years, but I really couldn't understand how much of an impact it had on her until I recently discovered Robert Webster's book about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, The Untold Story. My mother's quoted on many pages. One of the things I do remember that my mother told me was captured in another book, Inside the Beverly Hills Fire, which I read recently. I remember my mother telling me how Ron Schilling came up to her, part of the ownership family and manager, and telling her to stop taking any more reservations. John Davidson, the headline act, was a hugely popular act for a Memorial Day weekend and packed the house both Friday and Saturday night. John Davidson lost his musical arranger in the tragic fire. For those of you who are asking why 42 years and counting, it's because there's never been an official memorial dedicated to those who lost their lives in the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. I truly hope and pray that my educational and multimedia initiatives bring about a long-awaited Beverly Hills Supper Club memorial, whether it's on the property of origin or close by. Before I introduce my distinguished guest, retired Fire Chief Dick Riesenberg, I want to give a shout out to Ann Reynolds at Alexandria Brewery. I introduce my distinguished guest, retired Fire Chief Mr. Dick Riesenberg. There's a picture of Fire Chief Riesenberg back on those days long ago. Not too long ago, Mr. Riesenberg accepted a Medal of Valor for his heroics and Southgate Fire Department's heroics. There's that. Each member was given a Valor pin. Part of Mr. Riesenberg's acceptance stated, "We were told that our efforts that night saved the lives of approximately 2,000 people. Most of that number were people trapped inside, not knowing how to exit the building. Many of the 2,000 were injured to some capacity and were carried out." Mr. Riesenberg immediately acknowledged the firemen were all the heroes in my book. Through the years since the tragic fire, Mr. Riesenberg has delivered over 400 or 500 talks?
132 speeches, but I've been interviewed 544 times.
We had to get this right. Okay, so in 1998, at the 20th anniversary of the tragic fire that was held at St. Mary's Church in Alexandria, Mr. Riesenberg received a standing ovation for the words he spoke about the tragic fire and fire safety. Welcome, retired Fire Chief Mr. Riesenberg. 36 years went by before you received the Medal of Valor. What sequence of things needed to happen in order for the Medal of Valor to be given?
Well, for years I thought that fire guys, firefighters that were there had to have something, just like military. And I ran into the current fire chief, my wife and I did, at Sam's place out in Erlanger. And I said, Chief, we ought to do something. Well, he was all for it. And he said, why don't you contact the fire marshal from Kentucky, which I did. Bill Swope was his name. And Bill helped me along. I went down to Frankfurt several times, and we had a lot of emails and a lot of telephone calls. And we finally set a date. And he came up and did all the arrangements. The Southgate Fire Department paid for the medals. Those things are not cheap. And everybody that was at the deal that day got one of these. In fact, I'm wearing one right now. It's a little. Again, although that's not all I got, I have a larger medal that I carry on my Class A uniform, and my wife has it in the purse. I didn't bring it up. I'll show it to you here. I don't wear it on this shirt. I wear it on my Class A uniform. And here it is. It's a good medal. There's a few of these out in Kentucky, and I have one of them. I'm not going to say how many. It doesn't matter. But I have one of them, and I accepted that night, not for myself, in front of everyone. There were 300 people there. And in front of everyone, I said, I'll only accept this medal if we'll dedicate it to the 522 firefighters that fought that fire. Now, a lot of people, when I say 522 firefighters, they said, there wasn't that many there. Yes, there was. But not all at the same time. Some would leave, another group would come in. They'd leave, come back the next day. Southgate, however, stayed there 4 days and 4 nights, 93 hours, didn't leave. I left a couple of times only because the mayor and the city attorney wanted me to go up to several places. And my aide took over when I was going. But that medal means an awful lot to me, and I wear it with distinction, believe me. That picture you're holding up, Brad, is actually, it's a nice picture. It's not the day we got the medal, though. Yeah, it was a 40th anniversary, and that there was going to be a parade up to the spot, up to the, on the hill. But it rained pitchforks that day and couldn't do it. So the mayor of Southgate said, invite everybody down to Southgate Community Center, and we'll have it there. And that's where that picture was taken. And a lot of people got up and said some words, but my wife always told me, you blew too hard. She said, don't talk too much. And I didn't. That's a short speech I did.
I get that a little bit. Oh, I wanted to get to something that, may have a bit of emotion to it for you. You had told me many firefighters do not want to discuss the tragic fire, and I thoroughly understand that. And I would never push, any more than, no, they just don't want to talk about it. But so, with that said, I was going to ask if you could describe some of the emotions from some of the firefighters after receiving their Valor pins. Can you think of any?
Yeah, I can think of a few things. The chief of the fire department, who is chief now, was the one that handed the pin to each of the firefighters. I gave him a 8 by 10 paper, a certificate of acceptance that they could frame, and shook hands with every one of them. And I'll tell you what, we all cried, every one of us. I did too. We knew what we went through, and it wasn't fun. It was not fun. The thing probably that bothered me the most then, as now, and my wife will tell you, there are times when after 42 years, I still wake up at night. Not quite often, but often enough. crying, yelling at my firefighters to do this, do that. I fight that fire every once in a while. And when I meet these people, I feel their sincerity in their handshake. I really do. A great group of guys. And that doesn't mean we love each other. We had plenty of arguments and things, but one thing about firefighters, if the chief said you do this, you do that. And if it's done differently, you get fired. It's as simple as that.
Do you feel that the Medal of Valor could have been awarded sooner? Would that have made any difference?
No, it didn't make any difference to me, but, and I'm not bragging on this, but if I didn't get the ball rolling, I don't think we'd have it yet. So sometimes you have to pat yourself on the back.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And
well, you deserve it. You deserve it.
And we got it.
Well, that was a little bit emotional for you. Would it be okay if I took you back to that evening?
Sure.
You know, I'd watched an interview on YouTube with Mike Delaney, and learned you had spoke a little bit about that night. Well, you told me that your mother had planned to take your brother and you and your wife to Beverly Hills to celebrate birthdays the night of the tragic fire, but your mother decided to change until the following weekend. And by the way, Dick's brother is Father John Riesenberg, who gave last rites that evening. Little did both of you know that you would be spending a lot of time at Beverly Hills that Memorial Weekend in 1977. In fact, if I'm correct, I'm hoping I am, I think you took 4 days and 4 nights, and I'll touch on 4 days and 4 nights shortly. Anyway, I watched an interview with you and Mike Delaney. You described walking on your hands and knees out of the club. Could you please describe to us your arriving on the scene and then the need for a fire chief to walk out of the club on his hands and knees?
Well, when I first got there, I was the first responder. Myself, my driver, a captain on my squad, and 2 firefighters. And that's all we had at first. There wasn't a fire truck, it was a utility truck. And when we got to the top of the hill, 2 Beverly employees had on their white outfit. They were cooks in the kitchen. They were out on that kitchen roof and yelling and screaming. And I said, put up a ladder and get them guys down. I said, it looks like it's too far to jump. And the one guy yelled out, he said, I think I broke my ankle, I would have jumped. So my 2 guys got up there and helped the one fella down, and the one that was injured, just threw him over his back, and they called it the fireman's carry, and exited down that ladder, got him in an ambulance, and took him to the hospital.
The 2 gentlemen that were on the ladder, you discovered with the white, they were, who were they?
They're 2 of my firefighters.
2 of your firefighters?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was the start of our rescue operation. And then when that was over, in the meantime, when that was going on, other guys were setting up lines in the front building over on the kitchen side, blah, 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 and back at the cabaret room. And I said, I don't see any fire. I told myself this, I don't see any fire, it's all smoke. So I broke a firefighting rule. You never go in a building by yourself or without a hose or something, and I did. And I went in there, climbed a few steps, and I guess about 30, 35 feet away from the reservation desk, and behind that was the oval bar. I got as far as that, and when I got to the oval bar, all of a sudden I couldn't see the oval bar. The smoke was getting terrible, but still no fire. And I said, I've got to get out of here. So I dropped to my knees and I started to crawl along the oval bar. And I thought, wait a minute, this isn't right. I got behind it, so I'm further away. So I reversed my direction And I looked forward, I was on my hands and knees, I looked forward and I saw the red lights flashing through the smoke. And I knew that was our fire truck out the front door. That saved my life. I would be dead if that didn't happen, because it was a dumb thing for me to do, but I did it. I don't regret it, because I didn't see any fire. So at any rate, the lines were out by then. Well, a lieutenant of mine came along yelling and screaming. He said, "Chief, we got a bad scene in the back. There's people dead back there. They're laying all over the joint." He said, "We got to need some help back there." And I yelled over the emergency speakers. I said, "All firefighters, go, drop your lines, whatever you're doing, and go to the back." Of course, now that stopped any fire suppression, but the hoses weren't hooked up yet anyway. But there was constantly a flow of firefighters coming on the scene. So they just picked up the hoses, and the other guys went back to the cabaret room. And I didn't get back to the cabaret room right away, because there's a lot to do when you're setting up a fire, especially in that magnitude. And it took me a good 30, 40 minutes before I could get out of that way. And I had my assistant chief, Jack Payne, who's dead now. Jack died in 2000. And he did a yeoman's job. He was the fire chief when I wasn't at the command post. And I finally got back in the cabaret area. I couldn't believe my eyes. People were stacked like cordwood. And they pulled them out, the dead, and stacked them over in an open field there. The best thing that happened earlier was at Beverly, there was a group of doctors, the 30 or 40, maybe 50 of them, having some kind of an event for awards, and they were all physicians. Most of them stayed, and they put up a triage in the chapel, which was a building aside from the Beverly complex. And that was the place where the people that were alive were treated first and then sent to the hospital. We had 24 ambulances going back and forth. Now, if you can recall, Wayne, you'll know this, the driveway to Beverly was not very wide. If there was a car coming down and a car going up, somebody had to give a little bit. That's how narrow it was. And we had a fire truck in the middle of that, because we were drafting water from the hose on Alexandria Pike. So there was a fire truck getting the water from the Alexander Pike, and it shoved it up to the fire engine on the road, and then from there it flowed up to the Fort Thomas aerial. That's how the aerial got its water. Well, I noticed that a lot of the people that got out early, patrons got out early, got to their cars. I said, "Yeah, you're not going down that road, I can tell you that right now." The guy wanted to punch me. So I got the state police, and I said, "Have you got," well, he had about 24, 30 police there. And he said, "I'll take care of this." And then, boy, they didn't let anybody down that road. They just stopped in cars and drove them back away from the fire trucks. And they had to walk down the best they could. But what I told the ambulance drivers, I said, "If you're hauling a deceased, turn off your red lights, turn off your siren. But if you have somebody that's alive and going to hospital, turn on your emergency lights and siren, and we'll know you need to have the right of way." It's a simple thing that, I thought of that, and it worked like a charm. It really did. We had 24 ambulances, and a lot of people were alive after that because of the amount of ambulances we had. And they came from everywhere.
This night, were you able to leave Beverly Hills Supper Club that evening, or were you?
Leave?
Yeah, I mean,
No.
you were there though.
I was there till, it was 9 o'clock 9:01, we got the call, and then we got up there at 9:04. And it sounds almost impossible, but Beverly Hills was very close to the heart of Southgate, where we were from. You know, not a big deal to get there in 3 minutes. I forget what I was going to say now, but
I mentioned 4 days and 4 nights
Yeah.
previously. Were you literally, did you get to leave in those 4 days and 4
well,
nights?
I did, yeah. Most of my firefighters did not, but I did. The mayor of Southgate and
You had firefighters literally there for that long of?
93 hours.
Wow.
We got there at 9:04 on a Saturday night, PM, and we didn't leave officially until 6 PM on Wednesday. That's 93 hours. And got a little bit of sleep here and there. And a real nice thing happened with the Salvation Army. You know, these guys, firefighters, were hungry. We needed water. And the wives of the firefighters that lived in Southgate got coolers of water and carried them up that hill. But panic does strange things to people. And they were panicked. There's the doors, the exit doors, right there, glass exit doors. You want to get out, push the door and it opens and you walk out. They wouldn't do that. Well, I had a fire chief from Fort Thomas and a fire chief from Wilder right outside. I saw them and I got out. They gave me a strap-on little oxygen tank and I got some fresh air. But they got these people out. I'll never understand that. I'm going to have to ask somebody if I ever get to heaven, why didn't they get out? At any rate, another question I get a lot from people is, how do you know it was 2,000 people and blah, blah, blah? Well, the FBI and the state and federal fire marshals and fire people had all kinds of data that they were reading from. And they came to me once, later on in the thing, said, we got 163 dead. But he said, we're missing 2 people. And I said, well, I have no idea where they could be. Now this was after the 28, I'm getting ahead of my story. Maybe I ought to tell you that first. When I had 4 lines in the cabaret room, and they were 4 firefighters on each line putting the fire out. But I had 7 firefighters on the roof. We had to put a couple of holes in the roof and let the smoke get out of there. And Ralph Quitter was the fire chief and commander of the cabaret room. And he said, Chief, the roof is going to come in. We got to get them off and out. And I said, well, do it, Ralph. So he climbed the ladder out back, and I was in the front, and I did the same thing with the bullhorn. And we just yelled at him over the bullhorn. I said, get off the roof, get off the roof. Whatever you're doing, put the tool down. It's not worth saving. Get down that ladder. All seven of them got out of there. Two of those guys were my best personal friends, and I'll never forget. And this happens to me all the time. I love
There
to
were no
tell the story.
firefighters that lost their lives.
No.
I touched on the 4 days and 4 nights, and what was so relevant to that was, to me, was that you had to coordinate so many efforts. You talked about the narrow road and the state troopers and the fire trucks, and whether or not the guests were going to leave with their cars, and which they weren't. But there were so many things that you had to coordinate. It just seemed so overwhelming. But you managed to coordinate all these efforts.
I'll tell you one thing I did, Fred, that I thought was a good thing to do. We split the building up in 4 sections. Area 1, Area 2, 3, and 4. Area 1 was the front door, the front entrance. Myself and two chiefs from Wilder and Fort Thomas, we handled that in my aide. The kitchen side was Area 2. I had my second truck over there with an assistant chief in charge, and he had a whole complement of men with hoses. Area 3 was on the Alexander Pike side, and there was a set of stairs outside behind the stage. A lot of people got out there, a lot of people died at that place too. The cabaret room was Area 4. There were no deaths reported from Area 1 or Area 2. It was always a cabaret room or behind the stage, what we called Area 3. But when that roof came in, my officer that was in charge of the inside operation came to me. He said, "Chief, there's people in there. We couldn't get them. They're dead, but we couldn't get them."
Do you know roughly about what time
The roof was down now, and then we had to call in a crane from the Carlisle Wrecking Company down in Wilder, or Newport, wherever they were, and they pulled the roof trusses off to the side a little bit, and the fire was...
The evening? This was the Carlisle, they came that evening?
Yeah, that was, well, it was Sunday morning.
Sunday morning.
And getting light, actually. But I got my captain in charge, he was in there, and he knew where some of those people were, and I said, "Get you a group of about 9 or 10 guys and get in there and get all those people out." And he did. He deserves 6 of those medals. One body was, they picked it up and it came apart right at midstream in the stomach and all the insides.
Governor Carroll was there.
Yeah.
And do you remember bits and pieces of any conversations you might have had with?
I was talking with the governor at the time when the guys finished. And they come out and said, "We're finished, we got them by the door." He said, "There's 28 of them, can't find any more." And the FBI had cadaver dogs, and they put the 2 dogs in there, and they never found anybody, so.
One thing I think a lot of people aren't aware of, and I think that there's a lot of things about the tragic fire that more people should be aware of, and I think that's a good point. Every tri-stater should be reading these 2 books that were referenced, Robert Webster's and The Story of Wayne Dammer by Ron Elliott. What a lot of people aren't aware of is how many fire companies were dispatched to the fire. I mean, I've read, people from Reading, Ohio, as far as away as Maysville, Kentucky. How many fire companies responded?
Every Campbell County fire department was involved except Dayton. And the reason was, if somebody else had a fire of any kind or needed an ambulance, they couldn't steal them from Beverly because we needed all we had. So Dayton stayed out of it for that reason. And that was all put out on the air. Cincinnati called me on the radio and said, "Do you need help?" I said, "We need some ambulances." And he sent over an assistant chief and 2 firefighters. When you have 522 firefighters, sending 2 more didn't make too much difference. And I don't mean to belittle it. I was thankful that they came. But no department or person was called in from Hamilton County or across the river. They came on their own, and I was glad they did. I was glad they did.
Were you aware that, I didn't really know I was going to be asking this, but were you aware that night that Duro bagged the fire that was going on, was it 2? Was that at 2 different facilities of theirs or just 1?
On Duro?
Duro.
I'm not sure. I never got involved in it. All I know is...
But you were aware that they...
Yeah.
Did that affect your
yes, it
fighting?
did. It affected the amount of ambulances we had.
Amount of ambulances.
We had 24 And I'll be honest with you, we could have used 50. We packed, some of those ambulances were packed with 7 and 8 people who were injured badly in one ambulance. Fortunately, you didn't have to go too far. St. Luke Hospital was right up on Grand Avenue, and Beverly Hills on the Pike, so it wasn't very far. I mean, you get there in about 3-4 minutes, you know. So, at any rate, there were still 2 people missing. The FBI came to me and said, there's a group of women that had some kind of function upstairs in a room, and 2 of those people are unaccounted for.
Maybe? Roadrunners group?
Is that what it was? Well, he said there's 2 people missing from that group. The others are accounted for. So Jack Payne, my aide, the whole time, he said, I'll find them, Chief. He said, get somebody else to be your aide. I'm tired of babysitting you. So he did. He got in there, and it took him all day Sunday night, all day Monday night, and then he had some help. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was fed. Finally, on Tuesday morning, he said, I think I found him, but I can't get to him. They had to get that crane back and move all them roof trusses back where they got them in the first place, move them over. And sure enough, the cadaver dogs found them right away. Two women. They must have been in, we figured, were in the restroom. And then when the stuff hit the fan, they locked the door and fell through. Anywho, that's the story of those 2. They were dead when we picked them up, and the other 28 downstairs. So that's 30 people that are etched in my mind forever.
Please join me in my Beverly Hills Supper Club memorial efforts through donating to my organization, which is DBA Community Podcast, which will also help sustain dedicated educational and multimedia programs. Donations can be made by visiting Beverly Hills Supper Club Memorial.org, and there's a PayPal donation or GoFundMe linked on that website. Please consider volunteering for my organization's efforts to educate and re-educate everyone from older folks to youth about this tragic fire. Like Governor Julian Carroll said, we must never forget this tragic fire. Please also purchase Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club, The Untold Story, and the Beverly Hills Supper Club, Inside Beverly Hills Supper Club. They're both promoted on the website, and like I said before, every tri-stater should read these 2 books. There's never been an event like this that has brought from both sides of the river together. I know it was an extremely tragic thing, but nothing, brought everybody together and connected them for a long period of time. The amount of news stories about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire from that night in '77 for, 4 or 5 years or more, it just dominated the papers. People really need to be educated or re-educated about this tragic event and make this memorial happen. It was a tragic event, and to me it's tragedy on top of tragedy that there has been no memorial. Please contact me if you have any stories you'd like to share, or you know of others that would like to share a story. And I really want to thank everybody for coming and watching this first podcast with retired Fire Chief Dick Riesenberg. And God bless us all. Dick, would you care to make a couple closing comments? Or?
Every speech that I've done, and I've counted 132 of them, and most of the interviews, 544. I always ended by saying, in fact, one lady one day, she raised her hand, and I said, yes, ma'am, in a speech. She said, what was the highlight of your life during that fire? And I said, that's an easy answer, ma'am. We all went home. We all went home. Nobody died. Firefighters, I mean.